Good morning, Bitcoiners. I'm here with John from Sovereign and Javid from Celestia. Excited to talk to you guys about Bitcoin L2, sidechains, rollups. John and Javid, would you like to start off giving a brief introduction to yourself and what is a rollup? What is a sidechain? What is a L2?
Sure. I'll go first. My name is John Light. I work on product for a project called Sovereign. Sovereign is a DeFi protocol built on the Rootstock, which is a Bitcoin sidechain. And I also do Bitcoin research around layer 2 scaling and privacy. And just last year published a report that was sponsored by the Human Rights Foundation at bitcoinrollups.org, which looks at how rollups work and how we could bring rollups to Bitcoin.
Hi, I'm Javed. I'm part of the team that's building Rollkit. Rollkit is a modular rollup framework. Um, you can use Rollkit to deploy a rollup to Bitcoin, for example, but it's also flexible enough to use any other L1 as a DA layer. I've been working with Rollkit for the past few months. Before this, I was a part of the team that was building out alternate Bitcoin implementations like BTCD and Bitcoin. I also found a DOS vulnerability in Bitcoin early in 2020. So that's me. Yep.
Awesome. Thank you guys. So John, what is the sidechain? What is a rollup? Are both of them L2s? Are neither of them L2s?
Well, a sidechain is a blockchain that has its own independent consensus mechanism. So it has its own way of determining, block ordering and consensus between the nodes in the network. But it also has some sort of native bridge directly to another blockchain and uses an asset or maybe the asset of that other blockchain as its own like native asset for paying transaction fees or gas fees in the context of like an EVM chain. So like a concrete example of this would be like Rootstock, which is the blockchain that Sovereign is built on. Rootstock is a Bitcoin sidechain. It's merge mined with Bitcoin, but it has its own security budget. Determined by the transaction fees that are paid by Rootstock users. And it has a native bridge to Bitcoin. So users can lock up Bitcoin on the Bitcoin chain and then receive an equivalent amount of Rootstock BTC on the Rootstock chain, and then use that Rootstock BTC to pay for transaction fees, pay for gas, when they're executing smart contracts on the Rootstock blockchain. And then they can use Bitcoin, as a currency or asset in the Rootstock blockchain, just like any other asset. And so that's what a sidechain is. And then a rollup is, there are many different flavors of rollups, but the first kind of rollup that was ever really talked about in the literature was like a layer 2 rollup. Which is a blockchain that has a parent chain, kind of like a side chain, but the consensus of the rollup chain is secured by a smart contract on the parent chain, so that when a rollup block gets confirmed, it has the exact same level of security or double spend resistance as a block confirmation on the parent chain. So like if you were building a rollup on top of Bitcoin, for example, when a Bitcoin block gets confirmed with a rollup block that's confirmed inside of it, that rollup block has just as much double spend security as the Bitcoin block itself. And then the second feature that a rollup has is a native bridge to the parent blockchain that is secured by the layer 1 consensus. Again, if you're building a layer 2 rollup on Bitcoin, you're going to have a smart contract on Bitcoin that defines the rules of the rollup chain. And then users can deposit Bitcoin into that smart contract, receive an equivalent amount of Bitcoin on the rollup chain. And then when they want to move that Bitcoin back to the main Bitcoin blockchain or layer 1, they're going to submit the block with that withdrawal transaction to the rollup smart contract, and then the rollup smart contract has the ability to actually verify that the withdrawal was actually valid according to the rules of the rollup chain. So it has a much tighter integration with the rollup chain, which creates a very high level of security. Whereas sidechains are more kind of decoupled. They're not directly, their security isn't directly enforced by the layer one chain. So they're kind of like more separate blockchains, whereas rollups are more tightly coupled with the chain that they're built on. As to whether or not, one is an L1 or an L2, these terms are highly contested, I would say, depending on who you talk to. Everyone has a different definition of layer two. And some people, even question the utility or usefulness of the term layer two itself, just because it's so ambiguous. I would consider sidechains separate layer ones that just so happen to have like a native bridge to another blockchain. And layer two rollups are kind of, inherently layer two systems. That's why we call them layer two rollups. But like I said, there are many different flavors of rollups. So like a sovereign rollup, I would consider to be like a separate layer one. But a smart contract rollup, I would consider, is also called, a layer two rollup, and I would consider it a layer two.
Awesome. Thank you, John, for a very detailed and precise answer as always. And we can debate what a L2 is at another time. Javed, I want to ask you anything to add to John's explanation. Specifically, what is a sovereign rollup? Could you explain a sovereign rollup in more detail? And why do we have sovereign rollups on Bitcoin right now, but we don't have, the kind that John defined with the smart contract enforcing the consensus?
Yeah, for sure. I would like to dig into sovereign rollups. So sovereign rollups are rollups where there is no smart contract on the data layer. So the canonical chain is determined by the nodes themselves rather than a smart contract on L1. The biggest difference is that sovereign rollups can determine their own fork choice rules. So they can select the canonical chain based on a consensus mechanism that is native to the L2 rather than the L1. This enables some features on sovereign rollups which are like different from smart contract rollups. For example, they can fork differently because they don't have to rely on L1 for consensus. So this is like the biggest difference between smart contract rollups and sovereign rollups.
And why do we have one on Bitcoin right now, but we don't have the other?
Oh yeah, for sure. So I think the limiting factor for that is that Bitcoin doesn't have as an expressive a smart contract language like Ethereum, for example, where there are L2s today on Ethereum because the smart contract language enables verification of withdrawals and settlement. And that is possible because the smart contract language or the language has like opcodes which enable those, but those are limited on Bitcoin. So we can't have smart contract rollups on Bitcoin today, but we can still have sovereign rollups.
Got it. And so does a sovereign rollup need to basically record all the data onto the Bitcoin L1? And you guys are using the inscription space, right, with ordinals for that data? Is that correct?
Well, it's not ordinals itself, but we are using a mechanism that is similar to how ordinals is inscribing data with taproot transactions. Well, that's just an implement detail, though. You could use other mechanisms to write data to L1, but all the data that is required for coming to a consensus on the canonical chain is written to L1. And it can even be the fact that there can be two different forks that are written to L1, but the sovereign rollup nodes themselves can read these data and select a fork based on their consensus rules, even though there are two different forks on the L1. So yeah, all the data is written to L1 in case of sovereign rollups. Yeah.
Very cool. And I know the name of the company is Rollkit, so it sounds like it's a very compartmentalized. Like how easy is it to launch a sovereign rollup on Bitcoin today? And what kind of use cases do you think you could see? Is it more likely that a lot of developers will work on a single sovereign rollup, or do you imagine that there could be multiple sovereign rollups, maybe different virtual environments? How do you see this kind of evolving, I guess, on Bitcoin?
Oh yeah, for sure. So with Rollkit, we are really building a modular framework which can be extended to suit the requirements for however the developers want to use it. So the execution environment is through like the ABCI interface, which is mainly enables like different kinds of execution environments. You can use Cosmos SDK, Cosmos, some EVM, Fuel VM. You can have any number of different sequencing schemes. You can have a centralized sequencer, or you can have a decentralized sequencer selection algorithm. It can really, all the modular layers are plug and play, so you can replace them with whatever you want. Similarly, with proof systems, we are keeping it open so that you can have either fraud proofs or ZK proofs, depending on your requirement. And like we just discussed, the rollup itself can be either a settlement rollup or a sovereign rollup. So all these modular layers are plug and play, and they can be defined as per the requirement. As to how developers can use it, you can already deploy rollups using Rollkit today. We did a demo where we discussed, or rather showed how you can use Rollkit to write to Bitcoin as L1. And with Rollkit, you can deploy any rollups. So any customized rollups as per your requirement. So you can deploy to Bitcoin today. So yeah, it really depends on what developers will use it for. But there are like a wide variety of use cases, and we're looking to support the maximum use cases by making it as flexible and modular as possible.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Sounds very neat. John, so how do we get from a world where we are today, where we have this limitation on Bitcoin to have verification on the base layer? How do we get from here to there in the future? And how long do you think that's going to take?
Well, it depends on what kind of rollups we want to enable. So there have been some proposals, for example, from Salvatore from Ledger has proposed using a recursive covenant scheme, which could enable optimistic style rollups on Bitcoin with just this covenants capabilities on Bitcoin layer 1. If we wanted to enable validity rollups, which are like trustless, cryptographically secured rollups, which I describe in my report at bitcoinrollups.org, we would need to add validity proof verification opcodes to Bitcoin layer 1, and possibly also the covenant opcodes. So it depends on what exactly we want to enable, but there's definitely going to be a soft fork involved either way. But I don't see this as an insurmountable barrier. We've done many soft forks in Bitcoin's history. This is just one more milestone along Bitcoin's journey to hyper Bitcoinization. So I think we'll get there.
And you've mentioned in the past the idea of starting with a verifier for Bitcoin script, right? And in a recent conversation with Vitalik and Udi Wertheimer, Eric Wall, Vitalik mentioned the first rollup on Ethereum was actually for payments. So, could you talk about the potential for that? How would that be different from Lightning, for example, to have an initial payments, Bitcoin script based rollup? Maybe we could have ordinals on there because that would be supported by Bitcoin script. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so a lot of the benefits that you would get from doing like a Bitcoin style rollup on top of Bitcoin would be your scalability benefits or your increases in transaction throughput. So because of some of the compression techniques that you can use for Bitcoin or for rollup data, depending on the type of rollup you build, if you just want to build a payments focused rollup, you could use like an account style system instead of a UTXO style system and actually get your transaction sizes down to around 15 bytes per transaction, which is significantly smaller, like 10% or less of the size of a normal P2P Bitcoin payment on layer one today. So you could fit hundreds of thousands of transactions per block. Compared to several thousand that we're able to do today. And so this would get you much higher transaction throughput, much more payment, much more capacity for payments. You could potentially dovetail that into increased capacity for Lightning channel management transactions, like opening, closing, rebalancing Lightning channels. All of that has an on-chain footprint. And so if you can shrink that on-chain footprint down to the minimum possible size using some of the rollup compression techniques, then that could get you a lot more support for Lightning users, which could potentially either bring fees down or increase the total number of users or both. That I think would be the main benefits from a payments perspective. If you wanted to get a little bit more creative, you could also add new privacy protocols into the mix. So it could still be a payments focused rollup, but maybe it also does like the zero cash style end-to-end encryption, which is what the first or the Aztec V2 rollup was capable of doing. So then all of your payments on this rollup would be end-to-end encrypted, which would hide your transaction sender, recipient, and amounts and assets being sent. Basically, most of the metadata that's associated with the transaction would be encrypted, shielded from public view, which would be a huge privacy improvement for users who want to use Bitcoin for payment.
Awesome, John. So just to clarify, do we need verify for every virtual environment that we have on a rollup, or do we just need this recursive covenant that you mentioned earlier?
Well, if you want to, if it's a optimistic rollup, then we would only need to have a recursive covenant. If it's going to be a validity or a trustless, cryptographically secured rollup, validity rollup, we would need to have a validity proof verification opcode in addition to that. Each system kind of has its trade-offs in terms of security as well as capabilities. And I think developers who are interested in this are going to have to experiment and see, what works best for a given use case.
Awesome. Thank you, John. And Javed, I see you nodding your head up and down. Could you give us a deeper explanation of the difference between an optimistic rollup and a validity rollup?
Oh, yeah, sure. Generally agree with everything John said. For optimistic rollups, there is the cases you can have like a fraud-proof window during which fraud proofs can be submitted rather than immediately. And in most cases, you would have a fraud proof, which is going to pinpoint exactly where a transaction was malicious. And in case of a fraud proof, you can the verifier can know that there was like a malicious transaction. And the validity proof is is the opposite of that. Basically, it's a proof that the transaction was valid. So yeah, in both optimistic and in like this, it's basically the opposite of optimistic rollup.
Got it. Now that was a big aha for me. I didn't realize that validity and optimism were two opposite words, but here they are. And so one is like innocent until proven guilty, and the other is guilty until proven innocent. And so, Javed, could you talk a little bit? What is the UX of how the user interacts with a roll up, and how would that compare to something like Lightning?
Oh yeah, for sure. So generally, the UX would depend on the execution environment that you'll be deploying. So, for example, if you were deploying an EVM rollup on Rollkit today, from the user perspective, there would be no significant difference in terms of interacting with the rollup when compared to a L2 on Ethereum, like for example, Optimism. So you would have generally the same transaction flow from a user perspective. So you'd be signing transactions on MetaMask. Only the difference is that the data that was behind those transactions is being written to L1 that you are implementing with Rollkit. So if you were using Bitcoin for your rollup, the transaction would be going to Bitcoin, for example. So from a user experience, there is no significant difference. So yeah, and if all the execution environments that we are compatible with, you can use any of them, and there won't be any significant difference from in terms of a user experience.
Awesome. And Javed, one more follow-up. You mentioned earlier that you can choose between a single sequencer and a decentralized sequencer. Could you define what you mean by a decentralized sequencer selection and how that works?
Oh yeah, for sure. So the sequencer mechanism right now on the rollups deployed today is less than ideal, because most of the times there is like a single sequencer that is accepting transactions. So in an ideal case, there would be multiple independent sequencers who would be using some sort of algorithm to determine the next leader, or like the next sequencer. And ideally, they'd be as decentralized as possible, so that there is no risk of getting censored or your transaction not being accepted. So the way that decentralized sequences can be implemented depends on like the implementation with like the algorithms that can be used. So you can have a decentralized sequencer based on either round robin, or you can have like different staking mechanisms to determine the next sequencer. The benefit is that stake leader selection can determine, and they can be like more decentralized than they are today. So we are in the process of implementing different decentralized sequences mechanism. But once that is done, rollup developers can choose how they want to determine how sequences can be decentralized.
Awesome. Thank you. That. So guys, we're a minute away from the clock here. John, do you want to give any parting words to the developers listening? How can they find you? How can they follow you? And also for people interested in advancing these innovative scalability solutions for Bitcoin, what is your advice?
Sure. Well, folks who want to follow what I'm working on and interested in can find me on Twitter at Litecoin, LIG.
Oh, we lost him. And right at the right time, I'm glad we got him for so long here. Javed, you close up. How can people follow you, find you, and any advice for developers to advance this innovation movement?
Oh yeah, for sure. People can find me at TuxCanFly on Twitter, but also I'd suggest them to follow Rollkit Development. The handle is at RollkitDev. And just follow us on GitHub, review. We have some proposals going for decentralized schemes, because I think decentralized sequencing is going to be the biggest important problem. So we're looking for feedback and looking for suggestions on how to best implement that for most use cases.
Awesome. John, you're back real quick. Final words.
Yeah, so people who want to follow my thoughts can follow me on Twitter at Litecoin, LIGHTCOIN, or check out my blog, liteco.in. And if you want to follow what we're doing with the Rootstock sidechain, you can check out sovereign.com, SOVRYN.com, and the Rootstock community at rootstock.io.
Thank you guys so much for joining us. Great conversation today.